Welcome everybody to the seasonal diet, eating what our ancestors ate when they ate it like we were evolved to do. So continuing this week on the series of vegetables that are native to Europe. Now cabbage is a very difficult one because there are a lot of varying types that are grown all over the world now. But certain types have definitely been native to Europe for a very long time. So what we think is the different types of modern cabbage descends from the wild cabbage that you see here, which we can find growing wild in Europe, usually along coastal and rocky regions. Here is me on my trip to Norway, and that's something we call sjøkål or sea cabbage, growing right there in the middle of the rocks. But all of these different wild cabbages are closely related to the cole crops, they call them, which includes kale, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, and cabbage, and some different things like that. So although our ancestors in Europe would have been eating this wild cabbage all the way back to hunter-gatherer days probably, we think it was first domesticated and grown about 3,000 years ago in the Celtic areas of Europe, actually in the north and west. So there are a few European vegetables that were actually domesticated far from the Mediterranean climate, even though most of them were domesticated there. It's usually, the Egyptians or the Mesopotamians or the Greeks or the Romans who did all the cultivating and domestication of wild plants, vegetables, animals even. But this time, cabbage seems to be brought specifically to ancient Greece and Rome from the north of Europe, and from the Celtic and Germanic tribes. The first records of it comes from Greece at about 300 BC. Of course, the north of Europe has no written text from this time, but from archaeological finds, we think that it was cultivated in the north of Europe first. So great news for everyone here. Cabbage, I know a lot of you have ancestry from the north of Europe. Cabbage is one of the few vegetables that we can call ours, and it is home to our native lands in the north. There's a lot of different types, though, like I said, that were domesticated and evolved into different breeds over time, and they were used for different purposes. We actually have a lot of records of these from ancient Rome and Greece and Anglo-Saxon England and Francia from a bit later on in time, about 2,000 years ago. It's very interesting. You can read more about that history if you like, but yeah, we can say there are so many different types of cabbage, but the wildest ones and the oldest ones are the ones that are native to the north of Europe. Also, a very cool piece of history and the written records we have of cabbage. From the south of Europe, the translations are a bit difficult. They use different names and different things that are translated today into modern English in these texts that we have records of. But in the north of Europe, however, we all have one common word for it, coming from the same root. In Norwegian, it's called kål, Old English kavel, Old Norse kål, and all these different types of kål or kauli or koli, and many more from the modern languages that we have today. Very cool that the north of Europe, no matter how we developed over thousands of years, we all have a similar word for this cabbage. I mean, it's something like kål. When is it in season? Well, it depends on what breed we're talking about. The wild cabbage tends to come into season in the early to mid-summer. This video here was from August, and it's already pretty dried out, so we're a bit late here. This and most of the other leafy greens come to season in the spring and early summer. But when we get into more of the descendants that you all know of, you can find in your grocery store, like the basic cabbage, and the broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, and all these other things in the same family. These thicker things are coming to season right now in the fall, and that's why we find these things usually in traditional fall dishes in the north of Europe. So I eat plenty of it at this time of year. I love it. I usually like to eat it in some type of soup or stew, like is the tradition. I love it most in the Norwegian fårikål, which I am going to show you guys how to make next week in a video. But yeah, what do you guys think? Any recipes, favorite ways to use cabbage, favorite ways of eating this ancient vegetable that is native to Europe? Let us all know.